For an entire year she shared the same bed with a man she barely knew, in silence day after day, night after night. No words were exchanged, no gestures explained. What seemed like a soulless marriage actually hid a much deeper truth. When he finally broke the silence with just 3 words, everything changed. A story about waiting, invisible scars, and the kind of love that blooms when no one is watching. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is Linda Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. The sun of 1927 painted the fields golden as Claire made her way home, guiding the goats along a path she knew like the back of her hand. The scent of wet earth lingered in the air after the morning rain, and the gentle breeze stirred her simple cotton dress. At 19 years old, Claire had brown hair always tied in a messy braid, hands calloused from daily work, and green eyes that her late mother always said were windows to a better world. The small property where she lived with her father appeared on the horizon, and Claire quickened her pace. Since her mother had succumbed to tuberculosis 5 years ago, the house had never been the same warm place. Her father, Herbert, had become a bitter man, finding frequent solace in bottles of cheap whiskey and in card games at the town's tavern. As she approached the house, Claire noticed a black horse tied to the worn wooden fence. It was uncommon for them to receive visitors, especially someone who owned such a well-cared-for animal. Her steps slowed when she saw a man emerging from the front door. Tall, broad-shouldered, he wore simple but well-made clothes. His face was partially shadowed by his hat, but Claire recognized him immediately. Benjamin Wright, the heir of the most prosperous family in the region, who had returned a few months ago to take over the properties after his father's death. Claire had never exchanged a word with him, but like everyone in town, she was familiar with the rumours. Some said he had studied at universities in the East, others that he had a gentle temperament like his mother, and some whispered that he was too reclusive because he was hiding some dark secret. "Claire," her father called from the door, with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Come here." When she entered the modest room, she noticed that her father seemed strangely pleased, a sparkle in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a long time. "Mr. Benjamin came here today and we negotiated your marriage," Herbert announced bluntly, as if he were commenting on the weather. Claire felt the blood freeze in her veins. Her gaze jumped to Benjamin, who remained silent, his brown eyes inscrutable. "What?" was all she could say, her voice almost a whisper. "You will marry tomorrow," her father continued, ignoring her shock. "Everything is already arranged." "No!" Claire finally found her voice, feeling her face burn with anger. "I don't know this man. I will not marry a stranger." Herbert slammed his fist on the table, making the few utensils tremble. "You will go. This is my house, and you will follow my orders. If you don't agree, there is no place for you here anymore." The words hit Claire like a physical blow. In 1927, a woman without family and resources had few options. Her furious gaze turned to Benjamin, who remained silent, watching the scene. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling with restrained anger. "What do you gain from a forced marriage?" Benjamin finally spoke, his voice softer than she expected. "Miss Claire, I understand your surprise. We can discuss—" "There is nothing to discuss," Herbert interrupted. "The deal is done." Claire looked from one to the other, feeling cornered like one of the animals she cared for. With no visible choice left, she swallowed the cry that threatened to emerge and left the room, slamming the door. The next morning, an elderly and weary-looking pastor officiated the union in the small house's living room. Claire wore the only good dress she owned, inherited from her mother, hastily adjusted the previous night. Her trembling hands held a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked automatically, as if her body followed a routine while her mind refused to accept reality. Benjamin wore a simple yet elegant dark suit. Throughout the ceremony, Claire avoided his gaze, answering the pastor's questions mechanically. When she was declared Benjamin Wright's wife, a solitary tear ran down her face, which she quickly wiped away. Her father seemed satisfied, almost relieved. After the brief ceremony, Claire went to fetch the small bundle of her belongings. There wasn't much: a few clothes, a worn-out book of poems that had belonged to her mother, and a hairbrush with mother-of-pearl details, also a maternal inheritance. "I hope you will be happy," said Herbert without much conviction as the newlyweds prepared to leave. Claire did not respond. She mounted the horse with Benjamin's help, sitting in front of him on the saddle. The physical contact, although necessary for the ride, made her tense. As they rode away, she looked back one last time, seeing her father's solitary figure at the door of the house where she had spent her entire life. The Wright property was imposing compared to what Claire was used to. The main house, a solid two-story building with a wide porch, was surrounded by well-kept fields and stables larger than her entire old house. Discreet staff greeted Benjamin with genuine respect as they passed by. "This is our house," Benjamin said, breaking the silence that had settled throughout the journey. Claire dismounted without accepting his offered help and just nodded, still refusing to speak. A persistent knot in her throat seemed to prevent her from uttering any words. The inside of the house was surprisingly cozy. Dark wooden furniture, colourful rugs and light curtains created an atmosphere that contrasted with the austere image Claire had formed of Benjamin. "Mrs. Sarah, this is Claire, my wife," Benjamin introduced to a middle-aged woman who emerged from what seemed to be the kitchen. "Welcome, Mrs. Wright," said the woman with a gentle smile. "I have prepared the master bedroom for you." Claire felt her face flush at the mention of the shared bedroom, a reality she had tried not to think about until that moment. Benjamin led her up the stairs to a spacious room with a canopy bed, polished dressers, and a large window offering a view of the fields. A small vase with wildflowers adorned the bedside table. "This is our room," he said, placing Claire's small bundle on a chair. "There's an adjoining bathroom there." He pointed to a side door. "I'll let you settle in. Dinner will be served at 6. Claire remained motionless until he left, gently closing the door behind him. Only then did she allow her legs to give way, sitting on the edge of the bed as silent tears ran down her face. That night, after an uncomfortable dinner where Benjamin tried to start conversations that were met only with nods, Claire faced the moment she feared most. When he entered the room, she was already in bed, curled up in the farthest corner, an improvised barrier of pillows erected between her and the empty space that would soon be occupied. Benjamin looked at the arrangement for a moment, then simply nodded as if understanding. He turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of moonlight through the window, and lay on his side, respecting the physical and emotional barrier she had built. "Good night, Claire," he said simply. She squeezed her eyes shut, still refusing to respond. The following weeks brought a strange routine. Claire kept her silent vow, communicating only when absolutely necessary, with gestures and expressions. Benjamin, in turn, kept a respectful distance, never attempting any physical closeness beyond the inevitable sharing of space. Every morning Benjamin would leave early to supervise the work on the farm. Claire initially stayed in the house, helping Sarah with household chores or wandering through the gardens, trying to find some purpose. At night, they maintained the same routine, the barrier of pillows, his good night, her silence. However, Claire was observant. Gradually, she began to notice details about her forced husband. How he always removed his hat upon entering the house. How he knew each employee by name and inquired about their families. How his face softened when he talked to the children who occasionally accompanied their parents to work. One afternoon, while picking herbs in the backyard garden, Claire heard a commotion near the entrance of the property. Approaching discreetly, she saw several families lined up. Benjamin and 2 employees were distributing bags of grain, fresh vegetables, and occasionally milk and eggs to each of them. "How is your boy, Mrs. Cooper?" Benjamin asked a tired-looking woman with a baby in her arms. "Better, Mr. Wright, thanks to that medicine you sent for from the big city," she replied with evident gratitude. Claire watched the scene unfold again. Benjamin knew each family, their specific needs, their problems. For some, he offered temporary work. For others, seeds for their own planting. It wasn't ostentatious charity, but practical help offered with dignity. Later she asked Sarah about it, using one of the rare moments she allowed herself to speak. "Does this always happen?" "Twice a week, since the young master returned," replied Sarah, kneading bread dough. "His father already helped some families, but Benjamin expanded on that. He says no one should go hungry when we have productive land." That night, for the first time, Claire watched Benjamin while he slept. The moonlight cast soft shadows on his face, which looked younger in sleep. His expression was serene, without the weight of responsibility he carried during the day. Claire felt something shift inside her, not forgiveness or acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The next morning she noticed a single wildflower on her bedside table. She didn't mention it, but placed it in a small vase with water. It was a yellow daffodil, fragile and delicate. 1 month turned into 2, then 3. The routine on the farm began to become part of Claire. She got to know the employees, learned about the cycles of planting and harvesting, helped Sarah preserve food for the winter. She still maintained her silence with Benjamin, but the initial hostility had transformed into something more complex. One morning, she saw a construction beginning in a field near the house. Curious, she approached Thomas, Benjamin's trusted foreman. "What are they building?" she asked, surprising the man who rarely heard her speak. "A school, Mrs. Wright," he replied, adjusting his hat. "Mr. Benjamin planned this months ago. The nearest school is almost a 2-hour walk away, and many children can't make it, especially in the winter." "A school?" Claire repeated, looking at the structure taking shape. "Yes, ma'am, for the employees' children and the families in the region. Mr. Benjamin even hired a teacher from the big city, but she only comes twice a week. On the other days..." Thomas hesitated. "Well, he mentioned that perhaps you could help, since your father mentioned that you had a good education thanks to your mother." Claire felt a pang thinking about her father talking about her mother. The image of her mother teaching her to read by candlelight, even exhausted after a day's work, emerged vividly in her memory. That night, the barrier of pillows was smaller. Benjamin noticed but didn't comment. When he turned off the light and wished her good night, Claire almost responded. Almost. The school was completed in early autumn. A simple yet well-built structure, with large windows to take advantage of natural light, tables and benches made by the local carpenter, and a small library that Benjamin had ordered from a larger city. On the day of the inauguration, Benjamin invited all the families from the area. There was a small celebration with food, music, and a lot of anticipation, especially among the children who had never attended school. "Miss Foster will come on Mondays and Thursdays to teach reading, writing, and math," Benjamin announced to the small crowd. "On the other days, we'll have volunteers." His gaze met Claire's in the crowd. There was a silent question there, a hope. Claire felt the weight of that look, the expectation not only from him, but from the children who were watching her with curiosity. The next morning, a Tuesday, Claire got up earlier than usual. She put on her best dress, carefully arranged her hair, and when Benjamin entered the kitchen for breakfast, she was standing, holding a book of stories she had found in the house's library. "Is it true that you were going to help at the school today?" asked Sarah. "Yes, I'm going to help at the school today," Claire replied to the woman under Benjamin's gaze. Benjamin seemed momentarily surprised, then a small smile lit up his face. "The children will be very happy," he simply commented. That day marked a change. Claire discovered that she enjoyed teaching. The children, with their curious eyes and incessant questions, brought a joy she hadn't felt in a long time. Sometimes Claire would watch him through the school window. He supervised the work in the fields, talked to the staff, inspected the crops. On some occasions, their eyes met from a distance, and she realized that he also watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. One night she woke up with a feeling of warmth. In her sleep she had moved to the center of the bed, and her feet were touching Benjamin's. Her first instinct was to pull back, but something stopped her. The touch was comforting in the night. She closed her eyes again and allowed herself that small contact. The next morning neither of them mentioned what had happened, but something had changed. The daily flower on the bedside table was now accompanied by a small book of poems that Benjamin left for her. Winter arrived with biting winds and occasional snowstorms. The school continued to operate, with a wood stove keeping the environment warm. In the evenings, Benjamin and Claire sat by the living room fireplace, he reading farm reports, she preparing lessons for the next day. "Why don't you ever smile?" one of the younger children asked Claire during a class. The question caught her by surprise. "I do smile," she replied defensively. "Not like Mr. Wright," the child insisted. "He smiles with his eyes too." Claire reflected on that all the way back home. Had she become as bitter as her father after her mother's death? The thought disturbed her deeply. That night, there was no pillow barrier. Claire and Benjamin lay side by side, separated only by the invisible space of their own hesitations. The storm hit without warning, a fury of snow and wind that swept through the region for 2 days. When it finally calmed, the farm was partially isolated by heaps of snow. The workers were busy clearing the paths when one of them came running to the house. "Mr. Wright, one of the newborn calves has fallen into a ditch near the creek. It's trapped and injured." Claire, who was in the kitchen, heard the report. Without a second thought, she grabbed her coat and followed Benjamin outside. The icy wind cut her face, but she remained determined. She had always had a special attachment to animals, and the idea of a suffering calf was unbearable. The ditch was partially covered with snow, which made it even more dangerous. The small calf, with brown fur and white spots, was trembling violently, emitting weak moos of fear and pain. Benjamin quickly organized a rescue operation. Ropes were tied, men positioned strategically. After several tense minutes, man and animal were hoisted to safety. The calf was immediately taken to the heated stable, where Claire treated its injuries with the help of Thomas, who had some veterinary experience. Benjamin watched from a distance, admiring the competence and compassion with which she worked. At night, Claire insisted on staying in the stable to monitor the animal. Benjamin, without hesitation, brought blankets and joined her. Sitting side by side on bales of hay, they occasionally checked on the calf, which slept restlessly. "He will survive," Benjamin said, observing how the little animal breathed more regularly. The silence that followed was not tense as before, but comfortable, almost intimate. The warmth of the stable and their closeness created a bubble of coziness amid the intense cold outside. "I still don't understand you," said Claire finally, looking directly at Benjamin. "How can someone so kind to everyone, even to a calf, have accepted an arranged marriage?" Benjamin stared at her for a long time, as if making a difficult decision. The soft light of the lanterns highlighted the lines of his face, the eyes that had seen more than his age suggested. "It's time," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "Time for you to know the truth." Claire felt her heart race but kept her gaze fixed on him, waiting. "On the night before I went to your house, your father and I were at the same bar," Benjamin began, looking at his own hands. "I was sitting alone when I saw your father involved in a card game with a stranger who seemed dangerous. Your father ended up losing and was threatened by the man. Without money to pay, he—" Benjamin hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "He what?" Claire insisted, feeling a lump forming in her throat. "He offered you as payment for the debt," Benjamin concluded, his gaze now meeting hers, filled with a restrained sadness. "I intervened and paid the stranger what your father owed. I said that I would agree to marry you in exchange for settling the debt." Claire felt as if the floor had disappeared from under her feet. The revelation was worse than anything she could have imagined. "I married you to get you out of that house," Benjamin continued softly. "Sooner or later your father would have traded you to any other man. I didn't want that future for you." Silent tears streamed down Claire's face as she absorbed the truth. Her own father had used her as currency. The man she had blamed for an entire year had, in fact, been her silent protector. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked, her voice choked. I thought you would hate me even more, he replied simply. And maybe you wouldn't believe me. You needed to get to know me first. Claire extended a trembling hand, hesitantly touching Benjamin's face. Thank you, she whispered, for never forcing anything upon me, for respecting my silence, for saving me. Benjamin covered her hand with his own, a tender gesture that communicated more than words could. I never wanted your gratitude, Claire, he said softly. Only your happiness. That night, lying side by side on the stable hay, watching the calf they had saved together, something new blossomed between them. It was not just the end of silence, but the beginning of their own language, made of glances, shy smiles and hands that occasionally met. Spring arrived with promises of renewal. The snow melted, revealing green sprouts dotting the fields. At school, the children learned about nature's cycles, while Claire, now with confidence in her voice, guided them with renewed enthusiasm. At home, the physical and emotional barriers had disappeared. Benjamin and Claire shared not only the bed, but dreams, fears, and hopes. On quiet nights, they told stories of their childhoods, filling the empty spaces of their lives before they met each other. One afternoon, while walking through the fields, Benjamin showed Claire a small plot of land near the house. I thought we could plant a garden here, he said, with flowers you like and herbs for the kitchen. Claire smiled, imagining the possibilities. A home of their own, built not out of obligation but by mutual choice. I would like that, she replied, intertwining her fingers with his, and maybe one day our children could play here. The look they exchanged contained all the promises of a future that, although it started with silence and resentment, now overflowed with loving words. A journey that began with a forced marriage had turned into a true union, proving that sometimes love grows in the most unlikely places, when watered with respect, patience, and kindness. And every morning, Claire still found a flower on her nightstand, no longer as a silent reminder of hope, but as a daily celebration of the love they had built together, word by word, day by day. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.